West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Now to a burst of violent threats and extremist rhetoric on the right, laced with talk about guns and civil war. It is the kind of language national security officials have warned could have real consequences. It is coming from some of the most prominent figures in MAGA. GOP Congressman Louis Gohmert, an election denier, answering questions about a so-called Second Amendment solution at a right-wing conference just this week.
I was there on the 6th, and thank you for fighting for all of us, man. Was there more we could have done?
Yeah, there's a lot more, but it needs a lot more people doing it than just a handful of us.
Keep fighting.
Yeah, they just so.
And are we getting towards like Second Amendment solutions at some point? Is it keep happening, or are we going to fix it? You think we are?
Well, I'm still in it because I think we can.
Can't tell if I'm dizzy from the camera angle or the content. Another sitting Republican congressman telling a conservative crowd that he hopes there isn't a civil war before musing about which side would win.
I think we have an opportunity in the next 4 to 6 years to prevent kinetic American forces, countrymen on countrymen, from ever meeting. Although I have no doubt that we'd be victorious if that ever happens. It's time for us to stop being sheep, stand up, and be lions. Let's make these people be... The radical left should be terrified of who we are. The radical left should be terrified of what we are going to do.
These are the messages we are now hearing from MAGA leaders. In the months before the January 6th riot, the FBI was warning that baseless claims about election fraud were, quote, likely to embolden U.S. domestic violent extremists. Again, that was before the insurrection. Now we are seeing talk of a civil war and the celebration of firearms. Two other GOP lawmakers releasing these Christmas cards glorifying guns, and MAGA crowds responding. Kyle Rittenhouse, greeted as a hero at a conservative conference. He brought a firearm to a BLM protest and killed 2 people. He was acquitted for murder, and that earns him rock star treatment. At the same conference, a Fox News host talked about how to interview Dr. Fauci on the street and veered quickly into violent imagery.
You got to ambush a guy like Fauci, okay? This is how you do these ambushes. Do you mind, Dr. Fauci, if I ask you a few questions? Now you're going for the kill shot. The kill shot with an ambush, deadly, because he doesn't see it coming. Boom! He is dead! He is dead!
We have seen how talk can spiral into action. So where exactly does the right hope to go with this? I turn now to Kurt Bardella. He used to advise Steve Bannon and Breitbart before repudiating. He's now a Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee advisor. And Juanita Tolliver is back with us. Kurt, your take on this right-wing talk of violence, of civil war?
It's a steady escalation that we've seen really happen for years now. It started with Donald Trump declaring things like the free press being the enemy of the people, inciting violence against the media, We've seen it in the run-up to the 2020 election. The promise that if they didn't get the result that they wanted, that there would be hell to pay, that there would be mayhem. We saw it on January 6th. Those words turn into actions. That these people, this audience of the Republican Party, these extremists, they don't take what they're saying as just sport or just casual conversation. They take it as gospel. They treat it as marching orders. And now we've seen it even ever since January 6th, the Republican deliberate effort to try to whitewash what happened and evangelize these domestic terrorists and turn them into some sort of heroes, with members of Congress like Marjorie Taylor Greene referring to those who are incarcerated who participated in January 6th as being in the patriot wing of the prison. It's all leading towards more violence, more mayhem, and really at the end of the day, the Republican Party has blood on its hands.
Kurt, I gotta ask you, you saw firsthand how Breitbart galvanized people. Do you see echoes of that same playbook in what's happening now?
Yeah, it is the same playbook, and that's what's so frustrating, maddening to watch it unfold over and over again. They're not doing anything new here. These dark forces, people like Louis Gohmert or Breitbart or Steve Bannon or Fox News, it's the same cycle. They fuel and feed outrage, and then they turn it into action, and then they sit back and talk about it as if they didn't have a deliberate role in it. And it really underscores why the work that's being done by the January 6th Select Committee is so vital, so important, that we have a full accounting, a full record, a full understanding of what went into January 6th, who was behind it, who funded it, who knew about it, who helped it. Because if we don't get that full accounting now, we're not going to be able to prevent the next one from happening. And believe me, there will be a next one if things keep going this way.
Juanita, I think it is easy to watch some of that footage and still say, oh, that's fringe, right? Don't pay attention to it. Don't give it voice. But polling from the Public Religion Research Institute shows 30% of Republicans think resorting to violence is needed to save their country. What does that number tell you, Juanita?
It tells me that this is the core of who the GOP is, what they represent, and what they're willing to do to advance their political beliefs. Because as Kurt was enumerating all the events that followed January 6th, I want to go back to summer of 2022 when we had armed men take over the Michigan State House. We had a full kidnapping threat and attempt on the governor of Michigan. This is something nationally that we know the FBI has been dealing with. And when we talk about fueling this energy, it's explicitly white supremacy energy, white insurrectionist energy that we're seeing being pumped up by this. And that existed, of course, long before Trump. Thing is, he and the GOP have emboldened it to the point and legitimized it to the point that it is now a viable political play for them. I think the reality is that when you see that 30% number, none of this can be dismissed. When you have members of Congress like Boebert going unpenalized, Marjorie Taylor Greene still walking around the halls, potential people who helped to incite the January 6th attack still sitting in Congress, you cannot dismiss it. And I fully agree with Kurt that the accountability is required from the Select Committee. They cannot let any of this pass, because if they do, January 6th would have been a dry run only for what they plan to do next.
President Biden recently said this to Jimmy Fallon about right-wing extremism. Take a listen.
The QAnon and the extreme elements of the Republican Party and what Donald Trump keeps sort of, seems to me, feeding the with the big lie, it makes it awful hard.
Kurt, what is there for the president to do about this?
Well, I think things like he's been doing recently, he in a recent speech directly called out those who have been using propaganda and misinformation to effectively lead their own audience to slaughter in terms of ignoring common sense science in addressing COVID. And the president has made it very clear from the beginning of even his campaign that he was ready to try to unite the country, try to bring this country together, try to move forward beyond these crazy extreme voices. I think that what he has seen, and I think probably been surprised about, is how mainstream these conspiracy theory lunatic extremists have become within the Republican Party. It's not just the outside fringes anymore like it used to be. They are now the ones in power. People like Jim Jordan and people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they continue to operate unabashed, unencumbered, because the Republican leadership allows them to do so, because they don't have a problem with what they're doing ultimately. If they did, they'd have done something about it. And so the mainstreaming of these very dangerous extremist type of characters, codifying them into the DNA of the Republican Party, means that going forward, there is no bringing that together. You know, one of the things I always say is, as much as I want this country to heal, I can't get along with someone who looks at me and sees me as a virus, who calls me the Kung Flu, who sees me as inferior because I'm from somewhere different than they are, or I look different than they do. That's what we're up against right now.
It is Thursday, the 23rd of December of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life, indeed. Well, time marches on, and it looks like we're going to have Christmas Eve tomorrow, and then Christmas Day the day after. Isn't that how it works? And then the New Year's comes up shortly after that, and we begin anew. Seems like it's just carrying on the old, but it's fun to think that we are beginning anew. All right. Hey, did you know there's a guarantee clause in the Constitution of the United States of America so that it ostensibly is supposed to allow the federal government to protect a Democratic Republic in each of the states? Meaning that if a state decided they wanted to become a dictatorship, they couldn't do it. If a state decided, their people wanted to vote, they wanted to become a theocratic dictatorship and take over states around them, they couldn't do it. Sort of like what's happening now. Well, there's also in the Constitution a thing about a separation of church and state with no religious tests. And yeah, I think that we are effed. Yep. All sorts of things in the Constitution that just don't seem to matter anymore because they were so quaint. So quaint. It's always quaint to the authoritarian dictator and its minions. I guess just some people wanted to have a monarchy, but they wanted to strip it of its robes. Well, we're not into kings. We're into the guru. Or whatever they want to call this guy. All I know is that when you've gotten to the point where you're drinking bleach out of a communal bowl, the jungle is not far behind. No, it's not. Or, I don't know, a compound in Idaho. Has to be a big one. So can the federal government go into Idaho and say, no, you guys are like out of it. This is not republicanism, meaning, the big R as specified in the Constitution of the United States of America. So I guess we could, though, pull that out of the quiver and use it, and it's never been used in 232 years, apparently. Now, it had been somewhat decided on. Taney, the Dred Scott judge, said that sounded political. That's Congress's view. It doesn't sound like a law. Okay, well, you know where that guy's judicial decisions brought us. So I guess we could just maybe disregard that. But we'll see. It seems like we don't want to play tough at times. I think that it's time. Now, at the top there was the discussion about, well, I call them the Insurgent GOP, because isn't that what they are? They are at complete odds with everything that's going on with the American government right now. Everything. That they are and have been brought to task because of their violent rhetoric. I know that they always say, oh, these liberals are such snowflakes. They know we're just like, we don't mean it. Really? Then how come there's all these attacks on people? I know that there was a couple of carjackings in the state that, well, this U.S. representative lady who, was it Philadelphia? I believe it was, yes. She got carjacked, and another elected, I don't know if it was a state rep or I believe it was more of a state rep. They were carjacked at gunpoint as well. The cops are saying it was just like a regular crime. But both of them were Democratic electeds. Now, to a Nazi cop, oath keeper type, yeah, it's just a regular crime. There's nothing special about those people. Oh, really? They're electeds. You get carjacked at gunpoint, that's quite serious when you're dealing with electeds. But I guess representative democracy, this republicanism form of government, because the reason it was called that is because the Greek and Roman republics, which had long been, extinct, but still idealized. Little did they know. Anyway, it's representative government is what we're getting down to. And a people cannot just decide to get rid of representative government by using the mechanism of representative government. F you. That's why I call them Nazis, all right? They use our rules against us to take away that which the rules are supposed to protect, and it's protecting their right to take it away from us. I think that if we were to weigh that on the scales of justice, no personal relation there. No. But if you were, I would think that the part that's supposed to save democracy, you're using the mechanism of democracy to save democracy, should outweigh the part that's using the mechanism of democracy to destroy it. I mean, that just makes sense. You can't balance that out. But apparently, we're trying. Oh, we got to give them we have to let them speak. No, we don't. You don't even have to allow them to hold office. You know, there's a part in the Constitution that says that if you've tried to overthrow the government of the United States of America, you can't hold office. Well, like I said, we also have a separation of church and state and no religious test. Look where that's got us. We are effed. Constitutional sheriffs? Yeah, they don't know diddly about the Constitution. They just know their Reader's Digest part. Actually, I think what their Constitution consists of is anything before the War of 1812, to be honest with you. And I often wonder which side they would be on in the War of 1812. I think they'd be storming the White House and burning it down. Just seems like, cause and reaction. Yeah, that's what happens. Cause and effect. Cause and effect. It's too early in the morning. I still need more coffee. But, hey, we make a curated show for in these times of where the heck am I going with this? I can, latch onto it and, just pull it in. Sort of like an anchor. It anchors me. I'm not pulling it in. I'm pulling myself to it. So why don't we go through the curated part of the show here on Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays as we begin in the Bistro Cafe, because save room, we still have the chef's table with our amuse-bouche at the end. Yeah, we do it at the end rather than in the beginning. I don't know. Just the way we do it. Well, on the rest of the menu, prosecutors want a 4-year sentence for the Chicago banker convicted of delivering $16 million to Paul Manafort. So this banker could get some, position in the Trump grift machine. Well, he did. It used to be if the Supreme Court said it would hold a special session in just over 2 weeks and proffer an opinion out of order to weigh challenges to 2 Biden administration policies covering vaccine requirements for millions of workers. It used to be they'd be called activist judges. Told you, we're effed. Oh, and the wreck of the last U.S. slave ship is mostly intact just off the Alabama coast. Ooh. After the break, we move to the chef's table where U.S. auto regulators opened an investigation into 580,000 Tesla vehicles get this, over a center console touch screen game feature. The driver can play games on his little touch screen while he's driving. Okay, now that's autonomous. And Amazon is taking India's financial crime fighting agency to court. Why? I'll tell you why. They're trying to quash an investigation into one of its 2019 deals. All right. I guess Amazon learned something from the previous administration. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to the chat room, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. And happy holidays. To the left of the chat room, across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. Happy holidays. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds our way when you can, it helps us pay our bills, upgrade the hardware and software, continue flying under the radar, and continue this powerhouse of resistance against evil dark forces arrayed against this great representative democracy. Yes, if you could, it would really help. So, happy holidays. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms because the show notes and links are quite important. Do check them out. Keeps me on my toes. And then you know where I've gone off. But you can tell. You can tell when I'm going off, I hope. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, you can do so at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Though I was looking at the price plans for Libsyn, so we'll see. We have a lot of shows in the archive. Most of those, I believe, rather than going on into storage on Libsyn if we decide to move there or anywhere else, we are putting it into the Internet Archive. So I'll get right on that. Got to. Because Spreaker is, well, you will still use Spreaker in some capacity. But we may be moving to Libsyn. We'll let you know. But right now, you can get podcasts most anywhere. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Larry Neumeister out of the Associated Press. A Chicago banker should spend at least 4 years in prison after he was convicted of delivering $16 million in loans to Paul Manafort in a bid for power in the administration of Donald Trump, prosecutors said yesterday, Wednesday. Stephen Koch, or is it Stephen, is set to be sentenced on the 7th of February for his conviction in July on financial institution bribery and conspiracy charges in Manhattan federal court. Conspiracy, almost like collusion. Cox's lawyers, in a sentencing submission in early December, argued for a non-custodial sentence for Cox. Yeah, just let's put some ankle bracelets on him. The judge said, his lawyer said he has led a thoroughly decent and law-abiding life, except for trying to bribe his way into the administration. But prosecutors said Cox deserved a sentence of 51 months to 63 months in prison because he corruptly abused his position as chairman and chief executive of the Federal Savings Bank and caused the bank to make $16 million in unsound loans to Manafort in exchange for Manafort's help gaining political power. They added, the government respectfully submits that the focus of the sentencing should rest on his crimes, which would merit serious punishment regardless of the defendant's character. But it is also true that the defendant exaggerates his claimed good deeds and sterling character. During a 3-week trial, prosecutors said Cox played a pivotal role in getting approval for a $9.5 million real estate construction loan, another $6.5 million loan so Manafort could finish construction on a Brooklyn condominium and avoid foreclosure. Defense lawyers argued that Cox could not have won approval for the loans without the bank's loan committee and underwriters agreeing to the terms, and they noted that the loans were obtained at a time when Manafort was considered wealthy and successful and has not yet been criminally charged. He had all this Russian money from Deutsche Bank and all these other places, and he hadn't even been caught yet. Okay. So much for the due diligence of the underwriters, eh? Prosecutors also elicited evidence at trial to show that Manafort helped Cox get an interview for a job in the Trump administration, although he was never hired. Although Cox had hoped to become Secretary of the Army, he eventually interviewed for other positions because that post had already been filled. And Scaramucci testified to that at the trial. Oh, really? Earlier in the trial, Scaramucci, who had worked on Trump's presidential transition team, testified that he never would have enabled Cox to get the interview for the administration post if he had known that Cox was helping Manafort to get millions of dollars in loans for his real estate ventures. Manafort served as Trump's campaign manager for a key stretch from June to early August of 2016. Manafort lost his position in Trump's campaign over his ties to Ukraine. Special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation led to his criminal conviction and a sentence of over 7 years in prison for financial crimes related to his political consulting work in Ukraine. And then in December of 2020, Trump pardoned him. Resco of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. The Supreme Court says it will hold a special session in just over 2 weeks to weigh challenges to 2 Biden administration policies covering vaccine requirements for millions of workers, policies that affect large employers and healthcare workers. The High Court's announcement late last night that it will hear arguments in the cases on January 7 comes amid rising coronavirus cases and is an extraordinary fast timeline. Just don't call them activist judges. The court had not been scheduled to hear cases again until January 10. A 3-judge panel of the 6th U.S. Circuit in Cincinnati ruled 2-1 on Friday that the vaccine or testing regime for workers at larger companies could take effect. Oh, is that why they hurried it up? The plan requires workers at larger companies to be vaccinated or wear face masks and get tested weekly. The requirement could affect some 84 million U.S. workers. Republican-led states, conservative organizations, and businesses had challenged the requirement after OSHA published the rule in early November. The rule was to go into effect on January 4th. The High Court also will hear arguments over a rule published November 5th by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid that applies to a wide range of health care providers that receive federal Medicare and Medicaid funding. It requires their workers to receive the first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine by December 6th and be fully vaccinated by January 4th. It was projected to affect more than 17 million workers in about 76,000 healthcare facilities, as well as home care or home health care providers. Decisions by the New Orleans-based 5th Circuit and the St. Louis-based 8th, as well as a federal judge in Texas, have the mandate blocked in about half of the states. In a statement last evening, after the court announced it would hear arguments, the White House defended its policies and said that, especially with the rise of the coronavirus Omicron variant, it is critical to protect workers with vaccination requirements and testing protocols that are urgently needed. The High Court's decision to quickly hold arguments on the requirements was unusual. Just don't call them activist judges. Both issues arrived at the court on an emergency basis, and the court usually quickly decides emergency applications without the more typical full briefing and oral argument. But the court has also been criticized recently for how it handles the process, which has been called the court's shadow docket. Justice Alito pushed back in September against that criticism, saying it was unwarranted because it's really a star chamber. The Supreme Court announced earlier this year that all the justices have been vaccinated. Because of the coronavirus, however, the court is not open to the public. Lawyers arguing cases must test negative for COVID-19, and journalists observing arguments also must have a negative test. Also brewing in lower courts are challenges to Biden administration's requirement that federal contractors receive COVID-19 vaccinations. Jay Reeves of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Researchers studying the wreckage of the last U.S. slave ship buried in mud on the Alabama coast since it was scuttled in 1860 have made the surprising discovery that most of the wooden schooner remains intact, including the pen that was used to imprison African captives during the brutal journey across the Atlantic Ocean. While the upper portion of the two-masted Clotilda is gone, the section below deck where the captured Africans and stockpiles were held is still largely in one piece after being buried for decades in a section of river that has not been dredged, said maritime archaeologist James Delgado of the Florida-based Search Inc. At least 2/3 of the ship remains, and the existence of the unlit and unventilated slave pen, built during the voyage by the addition of a bulkhead where people were held as cargo below the main deck for weeks, raises questions about whether food and water containers, chains, and even human DNA could remain in the hull, said Delgado. It's a stunning revelation, he said in an interview. The discovery enhances the research value of the Clotilda's remains and sets them apart from all other wrecks, he said. The finding was confirmed in a report that was provided to the AP and led to the site becoming part of the National Register of Historic Places in November. It's the most intact slave ship wreck ever discovered, he said. It is because it's sitting in the mobile Tennessee Delta with fresh water and in mud that protected it that it is still there. For Jocelyn Davis, a sixth-generation granddaughter of African captive Charlie Lewis and vice president of the Clotilda Descendants Association, the story of what happened more than 160 years ago is best told through the people who were involved, not a sunken ship. But she said she's excited to learn more about what has been discovered, adding, I think it's going to be a surprise for us all. The Clotilda was the last ship known to transport African captives to the American South for enslavement. Nearly 90 feet in length, it departed Mobile, Alabama, for an illegal trip to purchase people decades after Congress outlawed such trade in 1808. The ship had been sent across the ocean on a voyage financed by a wealthy businessman whose descendants remain prominent in Mobile. Yeah, that's called the Old Boy Network. The Clotilda's captain transferred its human cargo off the ship once it arrived in Alabama and set fire to the vessel to hide evidence of the journey. Well, that happens a lot with those types, isn't it? But most of the ship did not catch fire and remained in the river. Shown on navigational charts since the 50s, the wreckage was publicly identified as that of Clotilda in 2019 and has been explored and researched since then. The state has set aside $1 million for preservation and research, and additional work planned at the site in early 2022 could show what's inside the hull, Delgado said, but far more work is needed to determine whether the ship could ever be pulled out of the mud and put on display, as some have suggested. Freed after the South lost the Civil War, some of the enslaved Africans who were transported to America on the Clotilda settled in a community they started called Africatown, USA, a few miles north of downtown Mobile. A documentary about the now impoverished community by Alabama-born filmmaker Margaret Brown, titled Descendant, will premiere at the Sundance Film Festival in January, and descendants of the Clotilda captives are planning an annual gathering in February. Work is underway on a new museum that's meant to be a catalyst for tourism and new development in the area. All right, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hello, 60-Second Science listeners. I'm Katie Hafner, and I'm the host of a new podcast called Lost Women of Science. I've been writing about science and technology for decades, most of that time for the New York Times, but very rarely did I write about a woman who was a major figure. I don't remember it bothering me very much at the time. It just seemed normal. I believed I was writing about the most important people in their fields. But it became clear, as my career went on, that important figures were missing, namely, women. I started asking why this was a couple of years ago, and I kept coming back to something called the Matilda Effect, which is basically a bias against acknowledging women for their work in science. Instead, the credit goes to a man. A good example I saw in the news recently is Jocelyn Bell Burnell. She's a radio astronomer who discovered the first 2 pulsars. But the Nobel Prize went to a man. If we don't catch these misattributions, these women can just fade away from our consciousness, and we'll never know the truth about their story and about our history. I started this podcast to retrieve these scientists from oblivion. We put together a trailer for the series, and here it is. I'm Katie Hafner, host of a new podcast called Lost Women of Science. Through history, women have made hundreds of scientific breakthroughs.
She had a sixth sense about this disease that enabled her to sort of pick out, I think, important clues.
She was helpful in a very different, unnoticed way.
She put this puzzle together.
But many, if not most, of these scientists are missing from the public's consciousness.
And as I added up all this data in my head, it gradually became clear that her place had been ignored.
Each season, we'll explore and celebrate the life and work of one woman who shaped our understanding of the world. And we'll delve into some of the reasons you might not know her name.
I mean, why is it that Rosalind Franklin wasn't given credit for her contributions to the discovery of the structure of DNA? I think it's the same type of thing.
We'll be looking at the obstacles these women faced, but also their passion, their drive, their sheer perseverance. We're revisiting the historical record, one extraordinary scientist at a time.
But I finally figured out, wait a second, there's an alternative story here.
Join us as we unearth these remarkable untold stories. Lost Women of Science, coming November 4th, wherever you get your podcasts. Getting to these stories requires lots of digging. We at Lost Women of Science go searching in archives, in museums, in hospitals, in people's basements, to piece these people's lives back together after they've been neglected for many, many decades. Our first season is about a pathologist named Dorothy Anderson, the first person to identify cystic fibrosis in a patient in the 1930s. Her work is the foundation for the treatments available for the disease today. In the Lost Women of Science podcast, we break down the science and we try to figure out who these people were and what the world around them was like then. It's like a science podcast meets a period piece, meets a mystery. The more I do this research, the more I realize that women were at the heart of some of the most important developments in science. A couple of examples. In the early 1900s, Alice Ball, a young black chemist, came up with the most effective treatment for leprosy. And the work of Katalin Karikó, a Hungarian biochemist, has been crucial to the development of the Pfizer and Moderna COVID vaccines. Please join us here at Scientific American or wherever you get your podcasts. Just look for Lost Women of Science and you'll find us.
1 in 6 Americans get sick from eating contaminated food each year. Contamination caused by salmonella is especially common. It's sometimes found in poultry, eggs, ground beef, pork, and even peanut butter. To reduce your risk from this and other foodborne germs, remember to clean, separate, cook, and chill. Clean your hands with soap and water. Separate raw meat, poultry, and seafood from other foods. Wash counters, cutting boards, and utensils before and after using them. Cook all food thoroughly and use a food thermometer to make sure food is cooked. Promptly chill meat, poultry, eggs, and other perishables. Finally, don't prepare food for others if you're sick, and be extra careful when you prepare food for children, pregnant women, the elderly, or people in poor health. To learn more about making food safer to eat, visit www.cdc.gov/vital signs.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Does the Constitution guarantee privacy? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Most people's reaction to that question is, of course. Of course the Constitution protects a right to privacy. Everyone knows that, or words to that effect. And until recently, that statement would have been correct. The right to privacy is enshrined in the Fourth Amendment, which guarantees the right of the people to be secure in their persons against unreasonable searches and seizures. When the government, through its laws, seizes control of a woman's body, the government is denying her her right to due process and her right to be secure in her person, and is doing so without probable cause. That unwarranted exercise of raw governmental power, this search and seizure, violates the Fourth Amendment. To be sure, the words privacy and abortion do not appear in the Constitution. But that tells us nothing. The word democracy doesn't appear in the Constitution either, which doesn't mean it's not protected. The founders recognized the potential drafting problem created by naming specific rights, and so provided in the Ninth Amendment that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Privacy, freedom from unwarranted government intrusions was a guiding principle of the founders, but the right to privacy, as the recent Supreme Court argument about abortion demonstrated, is now under grave judicial attack. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. America's southern colonies included Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. These British colonies differed a great deal from both the New England and Middle colonies. The southern colonies were mostly rural and had economies predominated by agriculture. The southern colonies were characterized by both large plantations and small farms. Southern farmers and plantation owners grew tobacco, indigo, and rice. Cotton would not become a major crop until Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin in 1793, which made cotton cultivation profitable. Southern agriculture relied on the labor of enslaved African Americans, a fact that would lead to civil war in the 19th century. Although the economies of the southern colonies were driven by agriculture, certain places like Charleston, South Carolina, complemented farming with trade and commerce. Charleston was the trading hub of the South. Lush southern forests provided some of the best shipbuilding materials in the world. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1908. That was the day that 3 labor leaders of the American Federation of Labor, Samuel Gompers, John Mitchell, and Frank Morrison, were sentenced to jail terms for calling for a boycott against the Buck's Stove and Range Company. Buck's was headquartered in St. Louis. The company was notorious for being anti-union. The company's president, James Van Cleve, was president of the National Association of Manufacturers, which fought unions at every turn. In 1907, Van Cleve increased the workday from 9 to 10 hours for some of the Buck's workers. The workers went out on strike. In response, the AFL put Buck's on their We Do Not Patronize list. For that, the company asked the federal courts to intervene. Buck's argued that the boycott violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. The court issued an injunction. The AFL was told not to communicate about a boycott of Buck's. They were not even allowed to criticize the company in any way. The AFL leaders were also convicted and given prison terms. The AFL appealed, and the case languished through the court system until 1914. In the end, the U.S. Supreme Court dismissed the charges. Because so much time had gone by, it was past the statute of limitations. But the court did not answer the fundamental question of whether the boycott was legal in the first place. The long, expensive legal battle was a drain on the AFL's finances. Boycotts are an important tool for working people to register protest. Labor has long argued that the right to boycott is protected by the First Amendment's right to free speech. It's not surprising, however, that company owners will do anything they can to limit the power of workers. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 42 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only 44. And looks like we will have winds light and variable, and it is currently raining, and we're going to get about 1/4 inch. So there. Cloudy with rain and snow showers this evening, and we'll have a low in the low 30s, winds light and variable. Oh, we should have about 1/2 inch of rain today, and then tonight, with the rain and snow, it might be piling up to about 6 inches. Then periods of rain and snow tomorrow on Christmas Eve with highs about 38, and temps will be nearly steady in the mid to upper 30s. Winds out of the south-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And it looks like we should have about 1/4 inch of rain, and we'll see how much snow we have left after that. We do have increases in confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon. They have now increased to 259,042, and our deceased have increased by 3 to 383. Pollen is rated at none right outside the window here in rainy Rogue River. The air quality index is good for the region at 27 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.65 inches. Visibility is down to 1/3 mile, and relative humidity is at 99%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 51 and cloudy. Paris is 48 and sunny. Rome is 52 and mostly cloudy. Kyiv is 11 degrees and fair. Kabul is 36 and clear. Hong Kong is 62 degrees and rainy. Tokyo is 46 and fair. Sydney, Australia is 73 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 53 degrees with rain. And New York, New York is a freezing 32 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Shepardson of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. U.S. auto safety regulators said they have opened a formal safety investigation into 580,000 Tesla vehicles sold since 2017 over the automaker's decision to allow games to be played on the front center touchscreen. The National Highway Tax Safety Administration said its preliminary evaluation covers various 2017 to 2022 Tesla Model 3, S, X, and Y vehicles. This functionality, referred to as passenger play, may distract the driver and increase the risk of a crash. NHTSA said it has confirmed that this capability has been available since December 2020 in Tesla passenger play equipped vehicles. Before then, the game feature was enabled only when the vehicle was in park. The NHTSA said in a statement it was committed to ensuring the highest safety standards on the nation's highways. The agency said the decision to open the investigation was based on reports Tesla's gameplay functionality is visible from the driver's seat and can be enabled while driving the vehicle. NHTSA said it would evaluate aspects of the feature, including the frequency and use scenarios. Earlier this month, the New York Times highlighted the game feature, prompting the agency to say it was in discussion with Tesla about its concerns.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Aditya Kalra and Abarup Roy of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Amazon is taking India's financial crime fighting agency to court, seeking to quash an investigation into one of its 2019 deals. India's Enforcement Directorate has for months been probing Amazon's $200 million investment in India's Future Group for suspected violations of foreign investment laws. The investment is at the center of protracted legal battles as Amazon has used the terms of that deal and cited contract breaches by Future to stall the $3.4 billion sale of the Indian company's retail assets to a rival. In an 816-page filing, Amazon calls the investigation a fishing and roving inquiry, saying the agency had sought privileged legal advice and opinions from Amazon and other information not connected to the Future Group deal. Multiple Amazon executives, including its India head, had been summoned by the ED in recent weeks, and the investigation has caused unnecessary harassment, the U.S. e-commerce giant said in its filing. The directions by the ED asking for disclosure of legally privileged documents and litigation privileged information is derogatory of the principles laid out in the Indian Constitution, Amazon said in the filing, which is not public, of course. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Friday, Christmas Eve. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.